You know, I find it interesting, and like I said, I respect the delegate for his service over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think that all service is honorable. Not all service is quite the same. The service that I rendered over in Iraq was as a Special Forces weapons sergeant, so I am very familiar with the weapon systems that we're discussing. And I've always found the classification of a weapon as an assault weapon as being somewhat arbitrary, especially when we look at things like this. So what makes a AR-15 an assault weapon? Well, it's got to be a centerfire, semi-automatic round, but it's also got to have one of these characteristics. So if it has a pistol grip, AR-15 has a pistol grip, now it's an assault weapon, right? So instead of like a typical stock like you would see on a hunting rifle, if you have a pistol grip, now it's an assault weapon. That's it. You don't even need the folding stock. You don't need any of the other characterizations in here. And the reason why I call that arbitrary is because it is. It's a question of ergonomics. We had somebody testify once where they said, look, the reason why I use an AR-15 is because I'm disabled and this one's easier to use. If you put a forward grip, now it's an assault rifle. Now it's an assault weapon. Ultimately, weapons don't assault people. I've noticed this. If you take a weapon and you put it on a desk and you don't touch it, nobody gets assaulted. People do assault other people. And that should be the sort of crime that we're actually going after. But again, we're going after inanimate objects. And I think part of the problem here that a lot of us have with this sort of approach is because I do think the delegate was being very honest that he would consider it a friendly amendment if we added something on there that would essentially require the confiscation of all of these weapon systems, all of these firearms. And in fact, it does require some method of either disabling or confiscation if someone is under the age of 21. So when I was an infantryman in the 82nd Airborne Division, right, if I had one of these things, now I would have to hand it over to the government. Not because I did anything wrong, but simply because I possessed it. Because apparently at 18, 19, or 20, at 20 I was going through Ranger School. But apparently I didn't possess the appropriate mental capacity to be able to handle a firearm like this. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, the delegate is right when he says that our schools, that our playgrounds, that our nightclubs and everything else should not be war zones. They should not be. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The question is, why do we have the Second Amendment in the first place? Why do we have Article 1, Section 13 of the Constitution in Virginia? And the reason why, Mr. Speaker, this is historically validated again and again, is because our founders did understand that there was two responsibilities with respect to a free society. One was that of the security of a free state. That's why you see the well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state was rooted in the idea that free citizens had to be ultimately responsible for the security of a free state, whether that be from foreign invasion or from domestic tyranny. The second part of the Second Amendment, where it says the right of the individual to keep, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, was because it was rooted in the understanding that to even be able to have a well-regulated militia, you had to have citizens that were able to own firearms. Firearms to be able to defend themselves and to be able to defend their countries. So ultimately, I don't agree that this is going to save lives, and I also don't agree that this is where it's going to stop. Because like the delegate said, he would consider it very much a friendly amendment if we added something right now that would lead to the confiscation of firearms from millions of law-abiding Virginians. And keep in mind, this isn't just about firearms. This is about high-capacity magazines. What's a high-capacity magazine? Anything over 10 rounds. I'll tell you right now, most Virginians, if you've owned a pistol, it probably came with a magazine over 10 rounds. If you keep that magazine past a certain date, because a lot of your magazines don't have any stamp on it, which suggests what the particular date is, it's probably going to be assumed that it was post-ban. You can have a misdemeanor for every single one of those magazines. That means you could do jail time and you could pay a fine. Not because you have them, but for each one you have. So if you have a couple pistols and you have a few magazines each one, you could be looking at 6 misdemeanors. Not because you did anything wrong, but simply because you possess them. I also find it interesting, Mr. Speaker, that we are constantly told by members from the other side of the aisle that there is a lot to mistrust with our government. I don't necessarily disagree with that statement. But I find it interesting that On one side, they can display so much animosity or skepticism about the efficacy of that government with respect to both its intentions and its capabilities for providing people safe or properly adjudicating things within the criminal justice system. But then they will come here and say, but you need to hand over certain firearms because you don't need them. That same government that we told you that is potentially corrupt, potentially racist, potentially sexist, potentially patriarchal, potentially defunct with respect